of the Roman Empire until the year 387 under the Emperor Theodosius. Constantine simply allowed Christianity to be legal, as it had been illegal for 250 years. He did not impose Roman civil law upon the church. There are those who say you cannot trust the Council of Nicaea because it was called not by a council of great churchmen, it was called by the emperor. Friends, Constantine came to power in 312 AD by killing off his two rivals to the throne of the Roman Empire. Well, one of the two, he killed the other one about 5 years later. But the point is, he came to rule the Roman Empire, and up until his ascension to the throne, being a Christian was a capital crime. After he took the city of Rome, he went and found the Bishop of Rome, a man named Sylvestrus, and had to coax him out of hiding. Because officials of the Roman Empire were considered enemies of the church. The worst of the persecutions of the church was the last of the persecutions, which had just finished in the year 310. So the church had just come through a horrendous time of suffering and martyrdom. And it took the prestige of no one less than the emperor to convince the Christians to come out of hiding and form a general council. It wasn't the state imposing its will on Christianity. It was a very compassionate emperor guaranteeing the safety of the bishops and their representatives to come to Nicaea. And for those who would tell you that after Constantine's quote-unquote conversion, Roman civil law was imposed upon the church, they obviously have not read the Canons of the Council of Nicaea. Because the Council of Nicaea passed 22 canons, 2 of which directly contradict Roman civil law. There's a very important point that must be made, however. Number 2, it is important to note that the canons, the rules of regional councils, our regional council is called a synod, S-Y-N-O-D, a synod. The canons of regional councils were affirmed and adopted by later ecumenical councils. Before the church was free to meet at Nicaea as a united body, the church had met in regional councils, regional synods, to pass rules and make decisions about faith and order. These regional rules, many of them, were adopted and codified by later ecumenical councils, making them normative for the whole church. Do you understand? It would be, well, I'll give you an illustration. The city of Brea, 11 years ago, decided to solve its problem with day workers by opening a job center where workers would not be asked their immigration status. They could simply come, get off the street, meet, have a cup of coffee, and then contractors, painters, gardeners, local people could come by to a safe place off the street where they could hire day laborers. There was a lot of controversy. Should the INS raid it every other day? The INS did raid, and it was Pastor Lauren Wood of the local Foursquare Church who chased them off. And it is not a commentary on our opinion of immigration, legal or illegal. It's simply, you cannot have dozens of people dashing back and forth across Imperial Highway, stopping traffic. It's dangerous to them and to everyone else. So Brea opened a job center. It was the only one of its kind in the country 11 years ago. Monday, the Immigration and Naturalization Service met with the city manager of Brea to see if this model of job centers could become a nationwide program. It was a regional, local idea. It was a Brea idea, a good one, a workable idea that is now going to have the force of national law. It's the same thing with the regional councils of the church. They met in Arles in France, Gaul. They met in Antioch in Syria, in Laodicea in Turkey, in Chalcedon in Turkish Greece. And they adopted rules for their local church, which were later codified and became part of the law for the whole church. Is that clear? Let me give you 3 illustrations. Little A, Antioch, 341 AD.
What was the date again?
341. You have to understand that there were places in the ancient world that had more lawyers than other places. Did you know that 25% of the lawyers in the United States are in California? A state of less than, what are we now, 30 million people. Yet we have 25% of the lawyers. That's not fair. If you really want something remarkable, do you realize that the second per capita highest ratio of lawyers in the country is in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C. is not a city of even 1 million people. There are 100,000 lawyers in the D.C. Bar Association. The same was true in the ancient world. There were certain legal centers, the great trade centers. Ephesus was known for 2 things: prostitution and attorneys. Yes, really, just one thing. Antioch, which was an incredibly affluent area on the Syrian coast, had a high percentage of lawyers. It also had a high percentage of Christians. So it's logical that the canons that came out of this regional conference at Antioch would be well written, exact, and therefore a good model for the rest of the church. Little b, Laodicea. Laodicea. Laodicea was to the ancient Roman world what Aspen is to the United States. It was a mountain resort inland from the Greek cities on what we now call the Turkish mainland, Asia Minor. It was fabulously affluent. Mountain resort. And Laodicea held a conference with also very, very good legal minds in 345 AD. And then please note, not as an A, B, or C point, but just underneath it, all of the canons of Antioch and Laodicea were adopted verbatim at the Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon in 451. So you say, well, where did canon law come from? It came from the experience of the church in dealing with its affairs on a day-to-day basis, in regional councils, in the writings of the apostles and other leaders of the church, finally codified by these 7 ecumenical councils of the church.
The date of the Council of Chalcedon?
I'm sorry, Chalcedon was 451. Chalcedon, of course, is also the council that decided on the canon of Holy Scripture, which was originally the idea of a regional council in Ephesus.
Out of Ephesus.
Were there contradictions between any of the regional councils?
Good question. The only problem that arose in canon law were the canons that came from Spain. The reason for that, very good question, George. The reason for that is the Spanish were involved in a horrific cultural situation. Spain was invaded by a tribe of barbarians who were so horrendous that their name still strikes terror into people today in Los Angeles County, the Vandals. They gave their name to vandalism. They destroyed everything they came in contact with. And the Spanish church found itself fighting off these murderous barbarians. And so some of the canons that were being passed by the Spanish church were so peculiar to their situation that they ran counter to the spirit of the rest of the church. Okay. I've talked to most of you, I think you've heard about, Megan's heard me talking about on the bus, is my friend Rudy. Rudy grew up in Siberia. German. From the German communities in the Volga that Stalin sent to Siberia. And Rudy has remarkable stories to tell about trying to be a Christian in Siberia in the 1960s and 70s. For example, in most of the Soviet Union, you could have a licensed church. In north-central Siberia, they did not allow churches at all. They didn't allow assemblies. Nobody, you couldn't meet with more than 5 people that you were related to at one time, except for birthday parties. So Rudy's church organized weekly birthday parties. And they met every Sunday for a birthday party. And this is the kind of thing that the Spanish church did. Rudy's church had to deal very, very carefully with informers. So that they had very strict rules about what you could talk about at church. These are the kinds of things that, I mean, not exactly, but I mean, mostly they dealt with things like, and I don't want to be indelicate, but they dealt with some pretty ugly issues, like the entire church had made rules about legitimate and illegitimate birth. Illegitimacy was a real problem in the ancient world, and how to go about legitimizing children who had been born out of wedlock. And there are some very firm canons on this. So many women in Iberia, Spain, and Portugal had been raped by the Vandals and become impregnated. The Spanish church had come up with a whole new set of rules. You see, those types of things. The church had very firm rules against eunuchs being allowed to be ordained to the ministry based on an Old Testament principle, while the Vandals mutilated their captives. You see, that's what I mean by contradictions. But to answer Dr. Connor's question more generally, Dr. Connor's question more generally, are there major contradictions in the canons of the regional councils and the ecumenical councils? No. For example, did one council say that certain practices like simony, buying and selling church offices, was okay under certain circumstances? Another council said it was a no-no. No. Did one council allow for men who had been married 3 and 4 times to be ordained? And another council say no. No, there are no contradictions of that nature. Number 3. This is for those of you who would like to do some more work on your own. The most complete work of canon law from the early church. The most complete work of canon law from the early church is the Dionysiana, spelled just like it sounds. D-I-O-N-Y-S-I-A-N-A. D-I-O-N-Y-S-I-A-N-A. Dionysiana. Little a. It's 2 books of collected canons. By Dionysius, D-I-O-N-Y-S-I-U-S, Dionysius, Exiguus, E-X-I-G-U-U-S.
I-G-U.
U-S, 2 U's. E-X-I-G-U-U-S. Written in the year 500. Dionysius Exiguus decided to comb the ancient world for all of the canonical principles he could find, and he came up with 2 books. Little b, it includes the Greek, Latin, not Latin meaning language, Latin meaning Western, as opposed to Greek meaning Eastern. Did you know that? The Western Church from Yugoslavia to Spain is called the Latin Church. From Yugoslavia to Russia is called the Greek Church, because that was the principal language. It included Greek, Latin, African, and ecumenical canons. Ecumenical means from the councils. The ecumenical councils of the whole church, of which there were 7, he said, for the young people. The Latin church was headquartered in Italy, but was strongest in France. The Greek church was headquartered in Constantinople in Greece, but was strongest in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The African church was headquartered in Alexandria in Egypt, but was strongest in modern-day Tunisia and Algeria. And then the ecumenical councils. If someone tries to tell you that the early church was Greek, that the early church was a Greek-thinking, Greek-philosophical, Greek-oriented body, and therefore Christianity is essentially Greek thought applied to theology, my scholarly response to that is, you realize that of all of the philosophical and religious movements of the ancient world, Christianity was the most diverse, the most international, the most culturally multifaceted. The church in North Africa was made up of people of color whose language was Berber. Abyssinians, black Africans, Numidians. Saint Cyprian was black. The fathers of Antioch were Lebanese. You know, they're not Arabs. Arabic is the language, but Arabs came out of Saudi Arabia in the 8th century. The Lebanese date back to the time of Abraham.
What can I say?
Saint Basil of Caesarea was a Phoenician. Saint Vincent was a Celt, like the Irish. This was a diverse group of people, not the cultural monolith that they would have us believe, those who would denigrate the experience of the early church. So Dionysius goes around collecting all of these regional canons he could find of the African experience, meaning North African, the Western experience in Latin, the Eastern experience in Greek, and compiles them into 2 books. It's an invaluable work showing the mind of the early church.
Could you say again where the Greek church was headquartered?
In Constantinople,
Okay.
in modern Istanbul,
Okay, and the African church was headquartered
in Alexandria in Egypt, but strongest in modern-day Tunisia and Algeria.
So I have a question, and we'll probably cover this later, but are we going to talk about what our response is supposed to be to all these things that they were, supposed to believe in?
Well, what things then?
All of these laws,
Oh yes, we're going to talk about that. The character of Canon Law. Yeah. I think you'll find, Carol, when we look at the laws themselves, after we get through how we came about, you'll see that they're all based upon biblical principle. They're just exegesis of biblical principle. Number 4. The next major work is the Hispania, 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 from Spain. Written in 633 AD, which, coming back to Dr. Connor's question, is a reconciliation between Spanish canon law and the rest of the church. But it's an excellent work because it shows the process the church went through in bringing canon law to a stasis, to consistency.
Are dates considered canon law as far as celebrations, feast days?
Yes. In fact, the very first, no, I'm sorry. That's the wrong council, as I said, Nicaea. The 14th canon of Nicaea has to do with dating Easter.
But the Nicaea was before the separation of the Greek church from the Roman church, and the Easter is different.
Yes. Did you know that Easter and Western Easter are different? But it's not because of the way that Easter itself is dated. It's the way the calendar calculates the vernal equinox. You see, Easter is set as the first Sunday following the first full moon following the vernal equinox, which is that day when the sun is equal distance between the equator and the North Pole in the northern hemisphere. But the Eastern Church calculates that time differently astronomically. I don't mean like astronomically. Their astronomy is different. They use Euclidean astronomy. I'm sorry, Ptolemaic astronomy. The Western Church used Euclidean astronomy. And it was a difference on calculating where the sun was that threw us off.
So what did they do back in Nicaea? Didn't they have one general way of calculating?
No, not the months. They simply said it must be celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon following the vernal equinox.
And they all came up with the same day.
Right. Right. And then when the church is separated, the Eastern Church, well, you realize that there are two entirely separate calendars in the East and the West. Greece is on a different calendar. I mean, actually civil Greece. Today is September 13th in Greece. They have the same 12 months, they just calculate differently. England did not adopt the calendar that we use today until 1757. Their calendar was it really, if you do original documentary research in England, it drives you batty. Because, for example, say the year of our Lord 1540, well, you have to check the month and then go back and check the astronomical calendar in order to figure out what was really 1840 or 1540 or 1541 or 1539. By the time England changed calendars, they were almost a year off. And they celebrated New Year's on the 1st of April, not the 1st of January. And the year they changed, 1757, they put out all kinds of publicity. The Royal Observatory in Greenwich put out all this publicity that we're going to change the calendar, just like we do at daylight savings time when people oversleep. They said on the 1st of January, 1758, we're going to change. This was in 1757. And the people who didn't realize they were changing and were still celebrating New Year's on April 1st were called April Fools. And it became synonymous in our culture with people who just don't get it. But that's calendars, you know. If you go to Greece, which you all will someday, I'm sure, and you look at a calendar, it will give the Julian calendar on one line and the Gregorian calendar will be used on another line. It's extremely frustrating, especially if you're expecting someone to pick you up at the airport. I've had that happen nowadays. Okay. Let's just forge on here because we're going to do medieval canon law and moral law. Okay? Let's just forge on. Darn the torpedoes. Capital C, medieval canon law. This is fun stuff. The principal vehicle for dispensing canon law in the Middle Ages I'm sorry, this is number 1 under C. C is, yes, the principal vehicle for dispensing canon law in the Middle Ages was through, and here's the word, penitentials, capital P, E-N-I-T, E-N-T-I-A-L-S, penitentials. The principal vehicle for dispensing canon law during the Middle Ages was through penitentials. Let me explain what we're talking about. There is no way to exaggerate how radically Europe changed between the year 600 AD and the year 700 AD. Europe, after 600, was plunged into an era we call the Dark Ages. Do you realize that in some parts of Europe between 600 AD and 1000 AD, we have no idea what happened? There is no written history. There is no archaeological evidence. It's like the lights went out. Fortunately, in Northern Europe, it only lasted for about 100 years. Then Charlemagne, Karl den Grosse, came to power ripped Northern Europe out of the Dark Ages. But there were some parts of Europe that did not emerge from this period of chaos and darkness until after the year 1000. Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, Bohemia. We really literally do not know what went on in those centuries. Bulgaria, as if we cared. But I say that to say to you that you cannot conceive of what it was like when the Roman Empire completely collapsed. One of the things that changed radically, and again this is hard for us to understand unless you remember what happened in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, the murderer. You've seen the killing fields? Is European civilization in one generation changed from an urban society to a rural society. The city of Rome went from a metropolis of 2 million people at the time of Constantine the Great to less than 50,000 people in the year 700. Bye, John. And Europe went from a continent of great cities to a continent of small villages. You remember, if you've seen the killing fields, or remember the massacre of Cambodians, the Khmer people under the Pol Pot dictatorship, he wanted to destroy the cities. He forced everybody to move out into the rural areas. And he destroyed Cambodian society. When the barbarians invaded the Roman Empire and destroyed the cities, Europe changed into a culture of little villages, little towns. Communication broke down. Transportation broke down. And so while canon law remained, the way of dispensing canon law, of communicating canon law, changed along with the changes in Europe. And the principal vehicle from canon law no longer became these great works of Dionysius Exiguus and the Hispania and the decrees of the councils, because they only existed in rare libraries among scholars, where most people not only couldn't travel, but had no idea of what they were, or how to get there, and even if they'd seen them, they couldn't read them. So canon law was dispensed through works called penitentials, little a. The penitentials are simple handbooks to assist priests in guiding confession and amendment of life.